Well, hi everyone. I'm recording this video on Saturday, September 27th. A couple days ago, I received a copy of this Wisjitty Elsner report, I-195 Washington Bridge, Bridge 700, the westbound bridge that's virtually been demolished now. Hopefully will be replaced in a few years. But this is the forensic evaluation and procedural audit related to the post-tension tie-down failures. So what makes the fact that this report is so explosive relative to the information in it is not so much the details of the various items. I've been telling you these things for the last year and a half. What's significant is this is a report on a study that was paid for by Rhode Island DOT. And ever since this time, they've been trying to keep this report out of the public domain. So I'm going to cover this report at a higher level and not get bogged down into too many details here. I'll save that for future videos. I want to maintain the impact of these key points. As I mentioned, I was sent a copy of this report a couple of days ago from a contact I have with what's going on in Rhode Island, and I really appreciate their efforts to expose what's been going on with the Washington Bridge. And they cover a lot of aspects of what's going on. And certainly they delve more into issues of potential corruption. I'm going to stay out of that relative to Rhode Island DOT and the contractors and just how this whole project's been administered over the years. I'm going to focus on the technical aspects. So thanks again to what's going on in Rhode Island. I've got a link to this story in the description. I want to send a thank you to Josh from Providence for this excellent drone footage that he recorded today on September 27th. That's what I'm featuring here in today's video. Another reason why this report is really a bombshell in terms of its content is that in many key areas, this report contradicts the narratives, the false narratives that have been promoted by Rhode Island DOT Director Peter Alviti, as well as that of Rhode Island Governor Dan McKee. If you read this report in any detail, it's obvious that what they've been telling you time and again is simply not true. And they've done it for political reasons. And it's unfortunate because this should be strictly the realm of engineering. So what are the key narratives that have been overturned here? First of all, Rhode Island state government has not kept people safe relative to the Washington Bridge. The fact that no one was injured or killed as a result of the circumstances that led to the emergency closure of this bridge in December of 2023 is frankly a miracle. So it wasn't a situation where they had good management and oversight of this bridge and closed it in a timely fashion. They were merely reactive. Another key narrative that's turned on its ear is the fact that Rhode Island state government has blamed everyone else for the circumstances that led to the emergency closure of this bridge. And when you go through the contents of the report, it's clear that Rhode Island DOT is primarily responsible without question. Another narrative is that it was these outside consultants that led Rhode Island DOT astray, that Rhode Island DOT wasn't aware that the bridge was in such bad condition. And that's clearly not true. They've knew for many years, and I'll get into that. And it's clear from this report that Rhode Island state government has tried to cover up this whole situation as far as the details of what led up to this closure in December of 2023. The fact that this report has been available since April of 2024 and has not been made public. It's just now been leaked, if you will, from a confidential source. It's clear that they're using this lawsuit, as I've said all along, as cover to avoid any accountability for the actions of Rhode Island state government relative to having to close this bridge. Now, there's some interesting things in this report. There's also some things that are kind of glaring by their omission, and I'll cover that here in a second. But one thing that struck me is that this is noted as a draft report, and there's no explanation in the text of the report to indicate why that's a draft. Now, in engineering, sometimes you have a client that stipulates they want one or more drafts in advance of a final version of a report. Sometimes that's done so that they can provide review comments that are later incorporated into subsequent revisions of the report. I don't like doing that in expert-related matters because I don't want my client influencing what I say in the report. So another reason sometimes these reports are left as draft is it gives the owner, in this case, Rhode Island DOT, an opportunity to deny things and say, oh, well, it was a draft. But if you go through this report in any detail, it's clear it's not really a draft in terms of its findings. Also, there's no indication in the report that they're waiting for more information, more inspections, more test results. It looks like a fairly complete report with a couple of exceptions that I'll note. So according to WJAR, who compiled this report, their main purpose and scope for this review was to address what events and conditions led to the failure of the tie-down rods, whether the agency's decision to close the bridge to traffic was reasonable. That's odd. That ship already sailed. I mean, they closed the bridge several months beforehand. They were very near to a decision of actually replacing the bridge. I think they actually made that decision a month later. I'll show that here in a second. Whether conditions leading to the failure could have or should have been foreseen, whether conditions discovered after the failure revealing serious deterioration of the post-tension cantilever beams should have been foreseen, and what actions or policy recommendations may be recommended to prevent similar types of events from occurring in the future. And they talk about their scope included two major things: a forensic metallurgical analysis of samples taken from the tie-down rods. That full report is not included in this draft report. I don't know why. There's no reason not to include it, in my opinion. And of course, they went through a detailed review of agency records to understand the design, construction, maintenance, inspection, repair, and rehabilitation history of the structure in general, with particular focus on the post-tension concrete cantilever beams, and so on. Now, in February 2024, VN issued this report to Rhode Island DOT, summarizing their results of their forensic analysis of the Westbound Washington Bridge. And at that time, they gave Rhode Island DOT the option of either rehabilitating the bridge or replacing it. And the way the verbiage in the report was, they were strongly shading towards a replacement option. But again, they left it open to Rhode Island DOT. It's not clear when WJAR was commissioned to do their study. The fact that this report, which is quite extensive, was issued as draft in April of 2024 suggests that it was started some months before that. As I mentioned, March 14th, 2024, Rhode Island DOT already announced that they were going to replace the bridge. So one of the scope items that I thought was missing in the WJAR report was Rhode Island DOT justified in deciding to replace the bridge instead of rehabilitating it. It's odd that they would ask the question, well, hey, did we do the right thing shutting the bridge down? But they never asked the question, did we do the right thing deciding to replace the bridge? All right, let's get back to this report. So one of the things they cite is they reviewed inspection reports from 2001 to 2023. Pretty much every firm that's been involved with this project in the last 10 years, at least the engineering firms involved with inspections over the last 10 years, are being sued by the state of Rhode Island for their role on the Washington Bridge. But don't you think it's odd that according to Rhode Island state government, all these professional engineering firms were negligent in a similar fashion by failing to document or note these key issues of structural deterioration and damage to the Westbound Washington Bridge? I think it suggests a systematic error, and the responsibility lies with Rhode Island DOT. And I've been saying this for about a year and a half now, but this is a quote out of the WJAR report. Per RIDOT's Bridge Inspection Manual, in accordance with BRIM, which is Bridge Inspector's Reference Manual, the team leader is responsible for planning and preparing for the inspection, which includes reviewing the bridge structure file and evaluating any bridge site conditions, such as confined spaces, non-destructive evaluation, and traffic control, while performing the field inspection. And so it goes on to say here at the bottom, which is the key thing. The state program manager is assigned the duties and responsibilities for bridge inspection, reporting, and inventory. These duties and responsibilities, they may then be delegated by the statewide program manager, who's a RIDOT employee, to project managers, that is consultants, and team leaders within the state. Although the statewide program manager may choose to delegate some or all functions to other bridge inspection personnel, the statewide program manager retains all responsibility for bridge inspection operations for which he or she was assigned. And again, as I pointed out, that language comes right out of Rhode Island DOT's bridge inspection manual. So how they can sue all these people for negligence relative to the inspections performed is just amazing. And I don't understand why the judge didn't simply throw that aspect of the lawsuit out, but certainly I don't think it bodes well for the state of Rhode Island if and when this gets in front of a jury. Now let's get into this narrative by Rhode Island state government that this was such an outrageously designed bridge. One of the original designers of this bridge, Mr. Laszlo Sigmund, he's made public statements in op-eds in the Providence Journal. Providence Journal took a picture here of him out at the bridge site. I think he's a very credible individual. In fact, he's quite the counterpoint to Director Alviti, in my opinion. Now, I want to play a segment of this interview which shows that they're promoting this false narrative about what a crazy design this was.
There was a pretty scathing op-ed in the Providence Journal by an engineer who worked on the Washington Bridge when it was originally built back in the 60s. And he said that there's been some evidence to him that made it obvious that the break that we've talked about many times that caused the emergency shutdown of the westbound span happened a long time ago, and that the DOT is misleading the public. I want you to respond to that. Did you mislead the public?
So opinions, there are a lot of opinions, on this, right? And this particular engineer, a retired engineer, has certain opinions of it. There are other engineers that have opinions of the design that he did. Calling his design bizarre and some of the design elements ticking bombs, the way it was designed.
All right, so did the WJE report suggest any of those things? No. They do mention the use of post-tension elements to provide counterbalance to gravity loads on a cantilever element, although not entirely without precedent, is not a common design configuration for highway bridges. This method of framing could be argued to be complex in its configuration. Okay, complex does not equal bizarre. And I know many of you don't like AI searches, so I followed this up with some verification here, but I posed the question of how many bridges have this type of post-tension balanced cantilever section. And they couldn't return the number of them, but this construction method is common technique for building long-span concrete bridges such as those found across the United States and other countries. So advantages or reasons for doing this type of design allow for construction over long spans without the need for temporary supports from below, which is useful when building over large bodies of water or deep valleys. So you've got the post-tension component. High-strength steel tendons are installed in concrete and then tensioned to create internal compression, which strengthens the member. And then you have a balanced cantilever. The bridge deck is built outward from the piers in segments, with each segment growing out from opposite sides of the pier and extending over the gap between piers. I just picked one example, this West Seattle Bridge, constructed in a similar fashion using these post-tension cantilevered sections. And this bridge was built in 1984. It's still in service. But again, it's not the crazy design that Alviti wants to make out. So this is what we're talking about. Here's the post-tension beam. These are the anchorages within the beam. Now, some of these cantilever sections are unbalanced at the main channel. So they have these pins to hold down one end of the beam. So a while back, Practical Engineering did a video about the Washington Bridge. They gave me a mention in that video, so thank you for that again. But I did some screen grabs here that shows these post-tension beams setting on top of the pier, and then you have these channels where the steel tendons go through, and these channels are grouted to lock these tendons into the concrete structure and to provide some corrosion protection. Now, again, at the main channel, you have one end that's in uplift, so they use these tie-down rods to hold them down. It was the rupture of these tie-down rods that led to the emergency closure of the bridge until people could figure out what was really going on. So these tie-down rods are important, but they're not fracture critical. In other words, if they break, you're not going to have a significant collapse of the bridge or a total collapse of the bridge. But it was symptomatic of bigger problems with the bridge. And those bigger problems were the discovery of significant deterioration of these post-tension beam elements. But these anchor rods were looked at when apparently somebody on site in December that was associated with a rehabilitation project noticed excessive bouncing or deflection of that end of the beam on the bridge. And I asked ValueSpace to go back and look at the deflection data for the Westbound Washington Bridge. And they showed significant movement as early as June of 2022 and other movements before that. So this situation existed with a broken pin related to deterioration of the post-tension elements in the beam for years before they closed it down. It's clear. Now, on this whole notion of the bizarre design, according to Director Alviti, in the WJAR report, they note that the design referenced the then current AASHTO specifications, including the standard specifications for highway bridges, 9th edition, and the 1965 edition of Rhode Island standard specifications for road and bridge construction. So in other words, this bridge was designed and constructed in accordance with applicable design standards. It wasn't the fact that you had this rogue engineer that did something wild that was a time bomb discovered years later, as Director Alviti asserts. In fact, I think his statements are really unethical as a registered engineer in the state of Rhode Island, that he apparently is. I mean, he's blaming an individual who worked on a project in the 1960s that was overseen by Rhode Island DOT, paid for by Rhode Island DOT for both design and construction, and it was their job to maintain and repair the bridge over the ensuing decades, which they clearly did not do adequately. All right, so let's get into some of these other false narratives being promoted by Rhode Island DOT. This is out of the West Jenny report. Should conditions leading to the failure have been foreseen? Many of the issues highlighted in this report show that program managers, that is RIDOT, bridge inspectors, and designers should have and could have been aware of the problems that were developing. This next point, should conditions discovered after the failure that revealed more serious condition of cantilever beams have been foreseen? And they say the deteriorating condition of the cantilever beams and corbels was clear. Given experience with the industry with poorly grouted post-tensioning systems on other bridges, more attention should have been given to signs of continuing cracking in the beams along the tendons, exposure of post-tensioning anchorages, and advanced deterioration of cantilever beam ends. Though the 1996 and 1998 rehabilitation undertook retrofit grouting of the tendons, it's not clear that all voids have been treated or that the treatment was 100% effective. So let's look at this. We're talking about years and years of deterioration. This is one of these anchor rods. No doubt corrosion was accelerated by exposure to road salts, but I mean, this is just unbelievable. As I've covered in a previous video, Rhode Island DOT knew about significant deterioration of the post-tensioning elements of these bridge beams clear back in 1992, so well over 30 years ago. There are issues with missing grout in these anchorage channels. There were issues with broken wire strands. A lot of these problems became even more evident in 1996 and 1998 during a planned rehabilitation that appears to have not been very effective, at least in my view of the information. And you can see this chart of areas where there was voids around these post-tension cables. So where there's voids, there could be the potential for corrosion, and there was corrosion in many documented cases. So there were many missed opportunities over the decades relative to RIDOT's management of this bridge in terms of identifying problems and fixing them. They had many inspections over the years. Again, Rhode Island DOT is primarily responsible or is ultimately responsible for those inspections. They're responsible for following up on any deficiencies identified from those inspections. They're responsible if important deficiencies were not identified. And I think what happened here, I mentioned a systematic problem with these inspections, with RIDOT being primarily responsible. I think based on the evidence, they just were not allowing for proper access. They weren't mobilizing the required equipment. They weren't constructing access ways, catwalks that would allow a full inspection of these areas. They didn't require, apparently, extensive non-destructive evaluation of these key elements. So failure after failure after failure, and it's RIDOT's responsibility. They have no right to try and push this off on other people. So I think news of the contents of this WJE report is not going to be received very well by the people of Rhode Island, just based on what I've heard already. So I'm going to post this video on 28th September, the Sunday. We'll see what kind of reaction there is in the media on Monday and the ensuing weeks. But this is just a travesty. I mean, it just illustrates with this report the utter incompetence of Rhode Island DOT, in my opinion, and the fact that you have a state government in general that is providing cover for these people. In fact, despite many people calling for Director Alviti to resign or be fired from his position as director of the DOT there, he got a big raise. So again, this is political, but the problems with the bridge are, it should be limited to the engineering realm. And the politicians need to get out of the way. So let me know what you think, everyone, in the comments section. With that, I want to send a shout out to those of you who've contributed to buy me a coffee. That's one of the better ways to support this channel. I also want to certainly thank the channel members and those of you who've provided super thanks, additional great ways to support the channel. So I'll continue, as usual, to follow up with developments with the Rhode Island DOT relative to the Washington Bridge. So please stay tuned for future videos.